In this video, we'll cover the vocabulary and planning steps for this line graph followed by a sample response. Writing a good response can be divided into two sections: what to write and how to write. What to write involves planning, which is crucial for a well-structured response. How to write focuses on vocabulary, sentence structure, and more. Let's start planning. You'll need the question as we go along. You can take a screenshot of it, or if you have access to the Cambridge IELTS Academic Book 19, you'll find it there. For graphs, charts, and tables, I follow a step-by-step system to analyze and understand the data in a simple, organized way. Identify the highest point, identify the lowest point. For line graphs, I look at the highest and lowest points at the beginning and at the end of each line. Then check if there is any value very close to the highest and the lowest points. Next, group or categorize the rest of the data. Look for trends. Trends are increase, decrease, fluctuation, remaining steady, etc. Next, look for the details of the trends. How much has something increased or decreased? Is there anything that stands out that is different from the rest of the changes? This includes both the overall trend, that is, when we look at just the beginning and the end of every line, and also the trend over the years, that is, within every line. Finally, figure out the overall trends based on this analysis. Let's apply this method to the graph we are working on. Before planning, I'll assign a number to each activity. We won't use these numbers in the writing, but they'll help in the planning. So I'm numbering each of the lines. This is something I've already mentioned here. Also make sure you carefully track where each line goes. Confusing the lines and getting the data wrong in your writing is a big problem. So for some of the lines, it's very clear where they are going. The first line is ending here, the second line is ending here. The rest of them are a little confusing. The third line is going down here. This is its path. The fourth is going up here, and the fifth is ending here. It's very important that we do not make any mistake in identifying the lines, otherwise we'll get the data wrong, we'll write it incorrectly in the writing, and that will mess up our band score. Let's see what the question is about. We are talking about how many people took part in 5 different activities over different years. A quick tip: make sure that none of the lines represent a total of the others. This is another line graph question. This is from Cambridge IELTS Book 15. In this case, one line is the total of the others. It shows the total visitors, and then the other 2 lines shows where these visitors stayed. So make sure you understand the question and see what is mentioned in it. We start by looking for the highest, lowest, and any values which are very close to highest or lowest. To do this, initially we are just looking at the beginning and ending of each line and seeing which one is at the highest and which one is at the lowest. The highest is very clear. Category 1 is the highest in all the years. And this is an important point which we'll even mention in our overall statement. Now we look for which is the lowest. The first 5 years, clearly category 5 is the lowest because it was 0. But even after that, till almost 2015, it is the lowest. We have mentioned it here. But after this, category 3 becomes the lowest. After this, we are supposed to look for anything which is very close to the highest or the lowest. This step we'll be skipping in this graph. because almost all the lines are kind of close to each other except for the highest one. So we skip to the next step, which is to group the remaining data. One way to group the data is that we mention a range. That is, we can say something like these three activities had participants ranging from 10 to 40. Instead, what I'll do is I'll mention the beginning numbers of each of these categories together using the word respectively. Respectively is a word we use when matching items in order. For example, if I say category 2, 3, and 4 had 50, 60, and 70 participants respectively, it means category 2 had 50 participants, category 3 had 60 participants, and category 4 had 70 participants. Next, let's look at the trends, that is, what has increased, what has decreased, etc., followed by how much is the increase or decrease. Category 1, we have already mentioned, it is the highest throughout, at the beginning, and at the end. Let's look at the trend of the rest of them. Category 2 sees minor oscillations. Minor oscillations means minor fluctuations, minor ups and downs that we see in this line. Category 3 is almost steady for the first 5 years. There's a minor increase, but barely any. And then we see a decrease, and at the end, it becomes the least popular. That is something we have mentioned before also. Category 4 is again steady for 10 years, then a major increase. And category 5 is interesting because it starts at 0, sees an increase, and then overtakes category 3. After this, we can look for the noteworthy or interesting features, which will help us figure out what main things to write in our response. A couple of major features that we can see immediately: this 0 of category 5, the major increase of category 4, and the drop of category 3. These are some noteworthy features, along with category 1 being the highest throughout. Based on all of this, we try to figure out the summary or the overall. An overall statement should mention the highest, lowest, and general trends to provide a complete snapshot of the data. So when we write the overall statement, we look for the highest, which is noteworthy because there is just one category which is the highest throughout. We may mention the lowest, although there are quite a few variations, so we could choose to not write it in the overall. And we try to mention some of the noteworthy features in the overall statement as well. Now let's check some synonyms for the words and phrases in the question. You can see them on the screen. You can replace gives information on with provides data about or presents details on. Number of participants can be changed to participant counts, and so on. Along with these, we have names of activities in the question. Change the names of any of the categories in the question only if you're very sure that the meaning will not get changed. Otherwise, leave the names as it is. So they're very specific names. It's best to leave them as they are. I'll only use synonyms where I'm sure the meaning stays the same, like changing film club to cinema group or musical performances to music shows. The rest of the category names I will not change. Besides these synonyms, we also need a variety of vocabulary to describe trends, comparisons, and figures. For trends, it's important to use different words for increases, decreases, stability, fluctuations, and overall trends. As we use these words, we must understand any differences in their meanings. For example, surge conveys different from increase, and plummet is a stronger word than decrease. Next, we have some key terms for making comparisons, which can help us highlight the differences and similarities between the activities. Finally, it's essential to present figures clearly. We can use adverbs like approximately or roughly. Also, we can use different types of sentences to give figures. Let's talk about which tense to use in our writing. When writing about data from the past, the best tense to use is past indefinite, also known as simple past tense. This tense is ideal for describing trends and figures in completed time periods such as 2000 to 2020. Use a mix of active and passive voice. Using a mix of active and passive voice adds variety to your writing. We'll follow this format for writing. We'll first paraphrase the question, then write the overall statement, and then write the body paragraphs with some details of the data, comparisons, and noteworthy features. We'll start with paraphrasing. Let's look at a few ways to do that. Here we have used synonyms like illustrates instead of gives information, community center instead of social center, over the time span instead of for the period. In this paraphrasing example, we have used passive voice with this phrase, information is presented. Here we have another approach of how to paraphrase the question. Besides using some synonyms, we have included the names of the 5 activities from the question. And here's another way to paraphrase the question using some synonyms and passive voice. So we have explored a few different ways to paraphrase the question using synonyms, passive voice, and even incorporating the names of the activities which are mentioned in the graph. You can pick the style that best suits your writing, but the key is to avoid repeating the original phrasing and to add variety with different sentence structures. Next, we'll write the overall statement summarizing the main trends shown in the graph. This is the planning we had. We'll focus on the highest, lowest, some noteworthy trends to write our overall statement. I'll show you 2 different ways of writing the overall statement using this analysis. Here's the first one. Overall, the film club was consistently the most popular activity, with participation numbers remaining the highest throughout. In contrast, amateur dramatics experienced a sharp decline after 2015, becoming the least attended. Meanwhile, table tennis and musical performances saw significant increases, especially in the second decade, while martial arts showed little change. In this overall statement, we have first mentioned the highest category, then we have mentioned the lowest category at the end, which is after 2015. After this, we were left with 3 categories, and we have mentioned the overall trends of these 3 categories. Here's another way to write the overall statement where there is no mention of the highest or the lowest, only the trends are mentioned and compared. Overall, the trends for the activities show a clear contrast. That is, they are very different. While table tennis and musical performances exhibited upward growth, amateur dramatics experienced a steady decline. The film club remained relatively stable over the period, and martial arts fluctuated slightly but did not see significant changes. With this, we have figured out how to paraphrase the question and how to write an overall statement. Now we start with the body paragraphs. We'll start with mentioning the highest category and mention that the numbers of this category stayed almost the same throughout. The film club consistently maintained the highest number of participants throughout the 2 decade period with only minor fluctuations in attendance. Next, we'll write about the category that is lowest at the beginning, which is musical performances. Because we have written the highest first and now we are writing the lowest, we'll start writing with the contrasting phrase on the other hand. On the other hand, musical performances began with almost no participants in 2000, making it the least popular activity during the first 5 years. Now we'll write about the rest of the data of the fifth category. Over the subsequent 15 years, however, this endeavor gained considerable popularity, hitting its all time high of nearly 15 enrollees by 2020. Now that we have mentioned the highest and the lowest categories, we'll start with writing about the rest of the categories using the word respectively. In 2000, martial arts, amateur dramatics, and table tennis started with comparatively similar participation levels at around 35, 25, and 15 participants, respectively. Now I'll mention the trends of these different categories. However, these activities showed varying trends over the course of the period, with martial arts experiencing minor oscillations, while amateur dramatics steadily decreased and table tennis surged after 2010. Amateur dramatics remained relatively stable for the first 5 years, after which it steadily declined, eventually becoming the least popular activity after 2015, with below 10 participants in 2020. Next, I'll mention the noteworthy features. The remarkable upsurge in the popularity of table tennis after 2010 stands out as a significant feature, its numbers growing from 20 in 2010 to close to 50 in 2020. Conversely, amateur dramatics experienced a declining trend following 2005, ultimately resulting in the lowest number of participants after 2015. Just to recap what we have done, we first analyzed the data that we have in the graph. To make this process simpler, we allotted numbers to each of the lines, which correspond to the different activities. These numbers are only for planning. We do not use them in our writing. For planning, we look for the highest, lowest, group the data, look for trends, increases, decreases, fluctuations, etc. Make a special note of the interesting features, and based on all of this, figure out the overall statement. Once we have done this, we follow this writing format, paraphrase the question, write the overall statements. I've shown you more than one way of writing the paraphrasing and the overall statement. After that, we've written the body paragraphs, making sure that we mention the comparisons, the different trends, and the noteworthy features. I hope you found this video helpful. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tips on improving your IELTS writing. See you in the next one. All the very best.